Welcome to the Collectability podcast. Today, we have an unbelievable guest and an equally unbelievable topic, and it is From Crypto to Gondolo, a conversation on value and collecting with Ryan Zurrer. Ryan Zurrer is the founder of a crypto wealth multifamily office and recently purchased Beeple's Human One NFT for a record-shattering $29 million US. While actively purchasing digital art, Ryan is also collecting Patek Philippe watches with a particular focus on Gondolo pocket watches from the early 20th century. Ryan is a collector at the intersection of traditional art, digital art, and horological art. He is a crypto native market leader, a 21st century philosopher, and a major investor in some very unexpected spaces. Ryan, welcome to the Collectability podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. To start the conversation, why did you spend $29 million on Human One?
Human One, for me, represented an important shift and very timely in the moment. It is a deep meditation on mankind's first steps into the metaverse. And it invokes this conversation with the onlooker, with themselves, about their own relationship between their digital identity and their real world identity. Obviously, this is very poignant in this juncture in time when the idea of the metaverse is now so much in the zeitgeist globally. And so I felt a deep sense of responsibility to share this conversation with the world. And as an aside from that, I've developed over the last year a really great relationship with the artist, Mike Winkelmann, commonly known as Beeple. To take the chance to have what will now be a multi-decade journey with him in evolving this piece was something that, as a venture investor, I looked at it as an opportunity to sort of invest in him and share in his journey over the next number of years. I consider Mike to be, unquestionably one of the defining artists of our generation. When I found out that he is willing to update this piece regularly over the rest of his career, I felt like that was a really unique opportunity that you can look at the economics of this piece somewhat differently than just buying a single piece. You're in fact buying many, many pieces. And not only are you buying many, many pieces, because he sold a collection of pieces in the past for quite a bit, but you're buying into his future progress. And I tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the future because that's where I will spend the most amount of my time. I observe that he is an artist that is continuing to evolve at an incredible rate, and so I made a bet that his future pieces will be even more spectacular, more irreverent, more funny than the ones that he's produced to date. And so that combination of his importance in art canon, his recognition among crypto collectors as the defining digital artist or NFT artist, really the standard bearer of this movement, and then the relationship that I have with somebody who I feel is like a long lost brother. He's about 6 months old, younger than me, and his brother is about 6 months older than me. They grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Ontario, and there's sort of a shared experience that we just feel very comfortable with each other. So I felt like it was investing in a relationship over the rest of my life. And at the end of the day, those are the things that are most valuable, right? Is these amazing relationships that you carve with wonderful people, right?
That is such a great way to kick off our conversation, Ryan, because it is all about relationships, and we're going to talk about the watch universe very soon. But I find it very interesting that you're describing a patron relationship that it just kind of invokes the spirit of the 18th century king and the artists that he works with. Also, like in the 19th century, you have railroad tycoons and how they worked with their various artists or architects and builders. And now here we are in the 21st century. You, a modern day tycoon, are having that same kind of relationship, but it's based in the metaverse, but still very much a human relationship at its core.
For sure. And, the way that we look at this movement is that we're seeing unfold a new set of relationships that are very fortunately different than the relationships of the past, right? Or a railroad tycoon working with an atelier on a one-of-one watch, in the, say, 17 or 1800s, actually 1800s, if it's going to be a railroad tycoon. The relationship with the watch maker was very different. There was a patron relationship. And one of the things that has inspired me so much about the NFT movement is that for the first time, we've seen artists who, digital artists have had great difficulty monetizing their work for a long time, the way that all artists have had great difficulty accruing the value of their work over a long time. And now we have a set of software tools that give artists artistic and financial freedom for the first time in generations. And so the patron artist relationship changes in this moment for the better, because it becomes one of equals, right? It becomes one of a collaborative effect rather than a directive effect, and an artist trying to appease that person that is their bread and butter, their, like, the vast majority of their income. And so I'm really excited about how this space is unfolding. I'm really excited about how this is going to change the dynamic of collecting, and very much impact horological collecting as well. So because we have this design space between the digital self and the real world self, and I think we'll see some really interesting things for collectors along the way. It's an exciting time.
It's interesting how dynamic that relationship exists in the art. And when we see whether it's watch or collecting silver or furniture, it almost is an immortality in that object from the artist and the patron. How do you see with NFT art and digital art, the afterlife, or maybe the afterlife it truly is forever in a way? Like, how do you see it living on in the future when the artist is gone and we are gone?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most exciting things about what NFTs as a medium of monetization and exchange has brought to collecting art, primarily digital art, at least for the time being, where now program in different rule sets that the artist, may want. It's quite tragic that many artists died poor, and their estates did not accrue very much of the value of their art. Right, Van Gogh is sort of one that comes to mind, and today's Van Gogh can program in a royalty into the resale of his or her art, such that forevermore, anytime there's a sale of their piece, a percentage of that sale goes back to their estate, it goes back to an address that they defined. It could be, it goes to a charity. It could be, it goes to 100 charities. And you can, that's trivial to program in. And so again, we see this sort of flattening of the economics, such that it makes for a more egalitarian sharing of value that an artist creates. And thusly you won't, we won't have these like super mega gallerists like a Gagosian or a Saatchi. It kind of dominate a market because, artists can freely display and sell in a variety of ways and in decentralized manner. And then on top of that, they're able to, capture and accrue so much more of the value of the resale of their piece, which I think is important.
That's fascinating. I never thought of it. So it's smart contracts working with artist royalties. Mm-hmm. It could really change the way that people buy and sell art. It makes me wonder, will there still be dealers as we know them in the future?
I think there will. So gallerists and dealers and tastemakers and curators, they will continue to exist. However, the economics of the game have forever changed. And you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. And very frankly, I think we've all complained about, whatever art medium it is, we've complained for many years that the core artist is not capturing enough of the value. And this mechanism, NFTs, which isn't a medium of art, it's more of a medium of value capture and exchange and monetization. This tool that we have of digital scarcity now allows the economics to become more favorable to the artist in perpetuity. And again, I'm just incredibly inspired by what that means. And the partnership that then becomes, that the art becomes a partnership between collector and artist. Could you imagine if Patek Philippe captured a 10% royalty on every resale of their watches? Like, how would that change the dynamic of the atelier itself? Like, how would they approach resale markets if they were able to participate in them more meaningfully? It's a really interesting thing to ponder.
And I love hearing about other categories like the art world and the growing understanding of NFTs. And I'm personally struggling with imagining where it's going within the watch world. And I even look at Patek Philippe's archives, the bedrock of their data. It is an early blockchain. We could define it today as a blockchain, and it helps create value in their watches. And it's one of the reasons that over 50% of all sales by dollar in the auction world are Patek Philippe. It's because there is this core information that lives on with each piece back in HQ. Can you just, because there's a lot of our listeners, including myself, we're really still trying to grasp the fundamentals of NFTs. And before we go deeper into digital art and how NFTs can change the watch world, can you give us a quick tutorial for the non-crypto native folks that are listening today?
For sure. NFTs are a provably a way to provably show scarcity, and that can't be altered. To the watch collector, think of it as a certificate, like that accompanies a timepiece that is unable to be forged or duplicated or transferred without the authorization of the owner. And so that gives you certain security and certain confidence that what you're buying is legitimate. Something that all of us as watch collectors have in the back of our mind when we're looking at a piece, especially in say an open market context where we don't know the seller. And so NFTs are basically this certificate that proves provenance, and that's essentially it. But what that means, and in reality, crypto itself at the very core, people think of it as very complex, but it's not. All it is a way to solve a computer science problem, which is called the Byzantine generals problem, that allowed for digital scarcity, right? Before NFTs or before crypto assets, you couldn't have digital scarcity because if you made a digital certificate of any kind, people could just replicate that and they would always find a way to replicate it. And then you would have massive inflation. And that with inflation comes devaluation. And, so any kind of digital asset or digital scarcity was very difficult to do. But what Bitcoin did generally for currency, and then subsequently NFTs does for, it basically any digital asset, is gives it that certificate of provenance that we rely on, especially when we're in adversarial markets where we don't know the counterparty. And that's essentially what an NFT is.
So NFTs are open source. I mean, anyone can actually see where the NFT is from and track it. But are there ways to hide names? Like as the buyer of Human One, for example, you've gone public that you own Human One. But if you chose to be anonymous, was that a choice, or is that a choice in the NFT universe? It's
not only a choice, it is uniquely enabled, right? Like if you try to sell an asset that you've collected, say a watch, it will basically get back to that it was you. like there's ways to figure out either via bank account information or emails or whatever else. But with NFTs and with crypto, it's very easy to remain fully anonymous. It's quite trivial to obfuscate any data or any information in that certificate that isn't necessary for its transfer. So you could obfuscate the name or any particulars that two people agree to obfuscate in the transaction. There are some things that if you obfuscate it, you may reduce the value, so you can't. But certainly who takes part in the transaction is very easy to obfuscate. And that's why a lot of people who care deeply about their privacy are drawn to this world of crypto.
That leads to the question with smart contracts: is fractional ownership coming to a collector near you? I mean, can you share Human One or sell a share in Human One if you wanted to? Or ultimately, if a NFT is connected to a watch, could multiple parties own a watch?
Absolutely. And in fact, there are experiments in that regard. So there is, Human One isn't going to be offered, in, at least not in the short term or even medium term, for fractional ownership. Again, we're very focused on just helping Mike tell this story of mankind's first steps into the metaverse. But other Beeples have been fractionalized. There's a project called B20 where 20 very one-of-one Beeples were put in a collection, and then they were fractionalized, and they have thousands of owners. We're very early in that, and it's something that's really exciting, and I think it's something that you're going to see much more of. We saw an attempt by a group of people to purchase the Constitution via Constitution DApp, and that would have made that copy of the Constitution be held by tens of thousands of people. And so we're seeing early experiments in this, and I'm optimistic that we're going to see some really interesting experiments in this way to evolve the idea of the watch club. Right? Like, imagine if we could buy, say a Grand Saunier, like a 6003 or something like that, and we could have distributed ownership of it. And then if one of the owners of the decentralized group or one of the token holders of this watch wanted to wear it and enjoy it for a period of time, they could post a collateral to the group. And then they could receive the watch, wear it, enjoy it, and then pass it on to another person in the group when that person posts the collateral. And then their collateral is released only after it's verified that they haven't damaged the watch. And so we can evolve the nature of the watch club to be much more than it is today. And then to be able to share really exceptional timepieces that we otherwise could not afford or otherwise could not have access to, like for example, the 6003R.
To see these digital twins exist in the metaverse connected to physical objects, I think this is the storyline of this decade. I mean, I think we're all struggling with understanding it. But I'm really thinking of Human One in a different way. We're all taking our baby steps into the future right now.
So there's been a thesis that I've been thinking about the last little while, actually, very recently since you and I last met. We could see NFTs flip crypto, and NFTs become more prominent, more used, more useful than cryptocurrencies, which 6 months ago was an unimaginable thing to say. That how could possible that this digital art could possibly flip a multi-trillion-dollar industry of digital currencies. And in reality, it's because NFTs will become more ubiquitous than cryptocurrencies, that it'll be like email. It's not something that you can say, no, I don't want to get into that. Like, that's not my thing. Like, you're going to be forced into it because the rest of the world is in it. So it'll be this thing that is part of your everyday, that the art that you consume is owned and shared by NFT owners, We just saw a really interesting drop from Nas, the hip hop artist, the seminal hip hop artist, in sharing his royalties for music. And we'll see it in so many other assets. The deed of your house will be an NFT. The ownership of your car will be an NFT. Your art, your certificate of authenticity for physical pieces, and we'll have these physical pieces that you can enjoy in the metaverse as well. So like I could have a watch, but then also have the digital representation of that watch, and my avatar in the metaverse could have that watch on as well, so that I feel more connection between myself and my avatar in the metaverse, right? So that it represents me more, the way that the watches often represent their owners, or there's that feeling of representation, certainly.
This just absolutely blows my mind. And every time I speak to you, you've challenged my understanding of collecting and value, and how the digital world is interconnecting with the physical world, which leads to the question, like, how are traditional art institutions embracing this or running away from it? How do they feel about the rise of digital art?
Generally, I'm seeing a lot of reserve and trepidation with respect to digital art. In connection with Human One, I've sat down with some major institutions, and I've expected them to come to me with a very specific thesis of exactly what they wanted to display and how they wanted to show this new generation of digital artists. And in fact, the conversations are much more reciprocal in that they're asking for feedback on where the tastemaking will go in this space, and how this will evolve. There's a cohort of people in the traditional art world who want to protect their territory, and they want to eschew this, but they will do so at their own peril. There is no way that you can deny this movement at this point. There is no way that you can compartmentalize it into, this is only for like crypto nerds who are interested in this very like cheeky digital art. This will transcend art in all its forms, music and fine art and horology over time. Some forms of art will come first and others will follow suit. But to not take an open-minded approach to it, I think is doing a disservice to your institution. If you do run a significant institution, you have to be taking a pragmatic, proactive view of this, and that goes for any institution that deals with anything artistic in really any way. If I told a major art institution that is sort of a household name a couple of months ago, the same thing that I've been telling banks for the last couple of years. If you don't get serious about this medium in the next 2 years, you will not exist in the next 20. That's not hyperbole, and that's not a threat. It's just the reality. It's the same thing as saying to like private, like mail deliverers. Like if you don't get serious about the fact that email is coming in kind of the late 80s, early 90s, then like you will have to rethink your business model fundamentally. And art institutions are going through that existential crisis of, do we try to negate this and marginalize it, or do we like forge, headfirst into the future and embrace it? And fortunately, most of the premier art institutions in America, certainly, as well as other places around the world, are at least formulating a coherent strategy, which I'm very encouraged by. And they'll take their time, but they'll come around.
This punctuated change that's accelerating faster than anyone's ever imagined. I'm just connecting because everything I think of is from the watch world view. When the quartz watches, the Swiss knew they were coming. The Swiss wanted to keep things traditional. They experimented with the Beta 21, but it completely flipped the industry overnight. And we're living through something equally as exciting and frankly larger with what's happening with NFTs. Wow, I want to keep going down the rabbit hole with NFTs, but I'm going to dive into the world of watches right now. more with you, and then we can kind of bring it all back together, because it's amazing how it's not just parallel, there's intersection everywhere. First, have you ever bid on a watch at auction? I know you've bid on art, but have you ever bid on a watch at auction?
Yes, I've bid on quite a few timepieces at auction. I actually got into a bit of a bid war, but lost for one of the early FP Journes, one of his original tourbillons, almost 2 years ago, and losing that auction kind of set a fire in me. And interesting pieces that I could, that I resonate with personally. That the story of that timepiece reminds me of part of my own story, and that creates a connection there.
That we have to dig deeper on that. You just dropped a bomb. How does that the Journe resonate with your personal story?
Well, I mean, certainly Francois as a builder is a very interesting entrepreneur and artist, and you can see his fierce independence in the pieces that he made at that time and the pieces that he continues to make, because Francois is really one of the last true independent artisans left here in Switzerland, who still has a hand in a great many pieces that come out of FP Journe. He will go and solve complex engineering problems sort of for the sake of it, like for the art of it, for the sort of show of it. And there's something just really spectacular and inspiring about the way that he approaches engineering challenges in horology. When we look at the canon of the important watchmakers of history, I think we will remember FP Journe as one of this generation's defining watchmakers. Certainly, maybe the Picasso of the era. I have difficulty thinking of there's Kari Voutilainen and there's some other great independents. Francois has had this flair to his work that makes very unique pieces. I consider myself to be, a fierce, independent, sort of unique, in my own right, and so I'm often drawn to the off the beaten path type of timepiece.
Do you have a Journe in your collection today?
I do. I have the Resonance and I have the Centigraph.
Very nice. Will there be other Journes in your collection in the future?
So I respect the vertical tourbillon that he's migrated to, but it's a little thick on my wrist. The vertical tourbillon was, again, one of these like interesting engineering challenges that he just set out to solve for the sake of it. But in flipping the tourbillon, he made the watch considerably thicker than the previous horizontal tourbillon. And so I certainly have in my wish list to add one of his early horizontal tourbillons to the collection. I think that'll be fun.
And you mentioned Kari or any others that you're on the hunt for.
I'm very, very excited that Kari Voutilainen and I are designing a watch that we call the Cryptex. And so this watch will have a series of mechanisms that if you sort of set them all in the right place and then press in the crown, out pops a crypto wallet for a crypto wallet. And this is really interesting because you find yourself in this Nash equilibrium of what this wallet would be. Like, would you store your life savings on this wallet? No. But could you store, say, $50,000 or $100,000 worth of crypto? Yes, you could, because no one in the right mind would destroy a Kari Voutilainen watch in order to get $100,000 of crypto. Like, that would just not be. Again, the Nash equilibrium exists. Mm-hmm. They in optimizing for their own economics, they would not do that. And so it kind of becomes like a watch that you can carry around a certain amount of like sort of break the glass walking around money. That amount that, like, if you needed to like buy a car and you're in some far off land, then you could get access to this cash very quickly and very easily. And make that transfer, and then you can have confidence that rational actors would not rob you expecting millions of dollars because the value that you store in the wallet is worth less than the wallet itself. And so, it's a really interesting thing. Then because we're designing this, we've been able to add a few things that are very personal to me. So for example, I run a 52-week calendar. I don't run a 12-month calendar. So adding the 52-week calendar was something that I wanted to do. I have a great affinity for astronomy, and astrology. And so adding a moon phase to that is something that I wanted. And you wouldn't usually have a moon phase with a 52-week calendar, right? Though that's something that's quite esoteric. And so I was lucky enough to spend some time with Kari and get along with him very well. He's a wonderful man, just really kind and generous human being. And so then we set out the path to build this Cryptex watch together, which should be ready probably late this year, early next year. We're very excited.
And will this be a one-off?
This will, yeah. Although I have told Kari that he may have some other people in the crypto community reach out to him in the wake of the creation of this piece. It's a really interesting piece that is a collaboration with his partner Kitamura that does the small jeweled sort of decoration that he's been famous for in the past with the Starry Night piece and others. And kind of that mix of this very technical Swiss watch with a bit of sort of Asian jewel and flair. I suspect other people in the crypto community will gravitate towards his wonderful work.
I think this watch is going to become iconic and considered seminal in the crypto and the horological world very, very soon.
We'll see. This is actually the first that I'm sharing this with anyone outside of my core friends and family that we're creating this watch together.
Thank you for sharing that with the collectability universe. We'll keep it between us. But once you get the watch, you have to come back. We need to see it. I promised we'd move from crypto to Gondolo, and we actually are marching in that direction towards vintage watches in a very natural way. Not only do you collect art, crypto, and independence, you also collect vintage watches. So please tell us what are you attracted to in the world of pocket watches and in early horology?
I really have you to thank for my introduction and help along my journey of collecting vintage. Your sage advice and very thoughtful input has been absolutely critical for me to find passion and find meaning and story in collecting these vintage pieces. So I'm very grateful. And one of the most amazing pieces that you found for me that resonates with me so much is the pocket watch specifically designed for the Brazilian retailer Gondolo and L'Oreal. And these are beautiful pieces that operate just like new, and they would absolutely be usable in today's context. But the story that sort of sits very deeply with me is really the story of Patek Philippe, or a very important chapter in the story of Patek Philippe. I spent a decade in Brazil building wind and solar power projects, and discovered firsthand how difficult it is to do business there. The road to Brazilian business is paved with bones of good intentions of foreigners, and we have many examples of some of the greatest companies and entrepreneurs in history who have fallen victim to the difficulty of the jungle. I often say, forget New York. If you can make it in Brazil, you can really make it anywhere. Welcome to the jungle. It's a whole new place. And so Patek Philippe in the early 20th century had great success in Brazil as Brazil was going through one of its boom eras. So much so that at one point, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but almost a majority, so over half, but less than 2/3 of supply of Patek Philippe at one time was going into the southeast of Brazil in the Rio de Janeiro market.
This is true.
It became so prevalent that the word Patek became synonymous with watch, that Brazilians used the word Patek to call a watch. And that stayed in Brazilian culture for many, many generations after that. But as Brazil is a place of booms and busts, it went through a difficult time at the end of the first dictatorship, or not the first dictatorship, but the dictatorship of the 1920s. This retailer, which was such an enormous part of Patek's retail demand, was left in arrears, owing the company many millions of dollars. That has a cascading effect in companies often, where then you can't pay your suppliers, and they call in debts, and so on and so forth. And this is the reason why Patek fell into the hands of the Stern family, and has then gone on to flourish and do quite well under the steward and guidance of the Stern family. I regularly remind people that Patek is unquestionably the most valuable and most strong brand in the world. It's one of truly the great companies in the history of commerce, and even the greatest company, or one of the greatest companies in the history of business, had such difficulty in Brazil. It reminds us, again, that this place is not for the faint of heart. You have to learn these financial gymnastics to survive in Brazil. Henry Ford lost almost $1 billion in the 1950s, which is obviously an extraordinary amount of money in today's terms, in a bygone adventure, creating this city in the north called Fordlandia to produce tires for his cars. If he would have lost much more, he also could have fallen into a bad situation economically. And we're just reminded of how difficult it is to do business down there. So the fact that I had forged my career in Brazil and kind of come up in that environment, and deeply resonate with how difficult it can be to manage a complex business, and trend is bilateral, is between two countries, and you have to deal with the different currencies and so on and so forth. It's just a wonderful reminder of the perils of this place with so much potential, right? And so I've been fortunate to collect 2 of these from you, and they're very special to me, and I'm super grateful for them.
Have you been wearing them, or do you keep them on your desk?
I do. I keep them both on my desk, and actually, because we only picked them up recently, even though we bought one before the pandemic, but then was only able to get it recently from you. And I've recently ordered a sort of display case with a glass case, so that they can hang and be displayed properly, and you can sort of see the marking Gondolo and Laborear, because you can see how deep that relationship was between the two companies, such that, funny enough, it's inscribed. Not only is it stamped with Gondolo and Laborear, but it's inscribed that it is fabricated expressively. So in Portuguese, that means exclusively for Gondolo and Laborear. It's an interesting deference to the retailer that you would never imagine to see in today's Patek Philippe.
You are the first person who ever shared thoughts publicly or privately, at least to me, of the idea that the Gondolo experiment directly resulted in the ownership of the Sterns. And look back at the history and think about that, and discuss with my colleague, Carlos Torres, who also takes some of these wonderful podcasts, because he's writing an amazing set of articles diving deep using primary source material about chronometric gondolas and what happened. He shared with me some of the stories. We can't wait to share with you, Ryan, and our friends, because it really supports your thesis that Gondolo directly resulted in the ownership of the Sterns in the 1930s. It really does rewrite history, at least the history we've been told to date.
I mean, that's fantastic. If he by any chance comes across one of those amazing hats, the big straw hats with Patek that very famously, some pictures of obviously some the original Gondolo club. I know you've made a new Gondolo club, but So if he comes,
I think you need one.
I would love to get one of those hats. And incidentally, I was meeting our mutual friend Shun at the Patek Philippe salon in Geneva a couple of months ago, and the storefront, the glass casing in the storefront is now adorned with with sort of memorabilia and motifs of this era of Gondolo and Brazil. And so it's interesting how the company seems to be celebrating this era. Although they also didn't have straw hats for me, which I was very disappointed in.
I think in time you're going to find the hat, but only if we can create NFTs of the hat.
I would even buy fractional ownership of that. That would be totally fine.
We can make that happen. You're originally from Canada. You're now based in Switzerland. You have Brazilian heritage. You lived in Brazil. How has your background informed your collecting, and has living and working in Switzerland even further changed your worldview?
Coming here and living here in Switzerland, working here very directly since 2014, but then living here full time since now 2019, you gain an appreciation for what horology means to the Swiss, which is very different than what it means to the rest of the world. I wasn't really into watches until this time, but I credit my partner, a really talented young developer, for explaining how horology impacts culture in Switzerland. We spend a lot of time thinking about what is a good store of value. And, in a world of high inflation, something that we've been predicting that's been coming for a while, and what we've seen in the past, what is a good, stable store of wealth? And the Swiss really look at watches, fine watches, not merely as a display of wealth, but also when they're bought correctly and cared for correctly as an excellent store of wealth. And, now we have the data that supports this, right? There's enough data of sales of different Patek Philippe references over time that we've seen that not only do they appreciate reasonably over time. Now, I'm not necessarily of the favor of making them an investment purchase first, but we do note that they're a good store of value over time, that they perform exceptionally well in down markets, and that that they're not a very volatile asset. And in a world of increasingly volatile assets, they offer you this way out and a way to enjoy wealth as well as preserve wealth. That kind of started me on this path, but I've been very excited and really grateful to find something that connects my heritage as a Canadian with with my new homeland, which incidentally is my deep heritage. I'm ancestrally from Canada, or from Switzerland, even though I grew up in Canada. And so we come to this Burke's reference 10, to our knowledge, the only one that we know of, stamped with Burke's on the outside, double stamped by Patek Philippe on the interior. And this is really interesting because, again, for me, this story is this collaboration between a Canadian organization and a Swiss organization. Incidentally, this would have happened around the time of the 1910s, when my grandfather led the Swiss Canadian Club. He was the president of the Swiss Canadian Club in Toronto. And so I have no proof that he had any involvement in the relationship between Burke's, the Canadian jeweler, and Patek Philippe. But it's something that I like to think that some of the work that he did would have helped propagate the relationship between this Canadian jeweler and Patek. And it's also sort of a sense of pride that a Canadian company was able to be stamped on the watch face of a Patek Philippe, that it wasn't only isolated to Tiffany's, that a Canadian company at that time held prestige as a jeweler, as a watch retailer, such that they could have that kind of bargaining power with Patek have their stamp. It's something that reminds me that Canada has had strength in bilateral negotiations for quite some time, much longer than I've been alive. And so this is an amazing piece because it wears beautifully. By the way, I wear it quite frequently. It's subtle, very unique. Not the numerals that one would expect from Patek. Single stamped with Berks. Just has this story that again resonates with me and sort of brings that connection.
And the subtle curvature of the case of a reference 10, you need to have one on your wrist to feel it and understand it.
I really didn't understand the durability of it until I had it, right? I bought it for that story, for that sort of resonance in collecting. But now I find myself wearing it because it performs so well and it just feels great on the wrist and looks fantastic. And this is a Patek that the purchase price of something like this and of a range of vintage Pateks against the current market makes so much sense, right? You could, to get something that feels and looks as good on the wrist from Patek in today's market. By the way, if you can get it, because the wait lists are now mostly measured in years, not months, you would be looking at paying on the order of double or triple to have that. And I have been pleasantly surprised at just the performance of these vintage pieces. As somebody who is often, function first and concerned about technology and improvements and performance and things like that. I have a range of modern Pateks and now this burgeoning collection of antique Pateks, and I don't notice myself, fundamentally a grand difference in performance. Obviously, there are some, there's a range of improvements, but it's not like vintage watches are not wearable. And so I really enjoyed being able to wear this. It was priced at a point that allows it to be wearable. It's not one of these ones that you have to kind of put in glass casing and just look at once in a while. And so that makes it a lot more fun. The story, and every time I have it on, somebody asks me about it, and then we get into the story of the bilateral relations between Canada and Switzerland and so on and so forth.
And if you're at a table and 3 other people are wearing a reference 5711 Nautilus, you're the one with the watch of the story to tell.
Exactly this. I was at a dinner a few weeks ago where one person had on a Richard Mille and a bunch of Rolexes around the table. And, there was a considerable amount of capital deployed in the collecting of the watches that were sitting around the table. And we all found ourselves in a discussion of this antique reference 10. And even though we're all technologists, we're all sort of future forward. And here we are in this grand discussion of the reference 10, which then naturally led to the discussion of the gondolas. And we ended up dedicating a big part of this dinner to vintage watches, even though most of the people went into that dinner not ever imagining that they would ever think about a vintage watch. And now we've got a couple of guys who are out there scouting and looking for them.
The question I'd like to ask to the people at that table is, how has supply, demand, and now social media driven this explosion?
Well, first and foremost, on a macro level, what we're seeing is smart people recognizing that inflation exists and that watches serve as a good store value. And you can get into the discussion of don't buy watches for investment or whatever. But the reality is that just cash is trash. So non-cash assets that you can both store value in and enjoy become more attractive. And that's like the big underlying, tidal wave that is moving this. And then from there, the nature of lifestyles has changed such that, people are spending more time and thought at home around collecting and things that they can enjoy quietly themselves in their own four walls. That's a big part of it. And overall, I myself, as as a venture capitalist, I like to be contrarian. I like to zig where others zag. And so when I look at the data and I look at how much we've run in the last little while across the board in modern watch pricing, I find myself gravitating to vintage watches, which have not had the expressive price appreciation over the last sort of 24 to 36 months that we've had in modern watches. And, over time, like the inflation and sort of supply of those watches is known the way that modern watches are known. And so over time, those demand supply dynamics should even out, and you should have a return to rationality between vintage pieces and modern pieces, right? There, we think about a range of Pateks that the version a decade ago or 2 decades ago are priced at dramatically less what the modern version is. One would think that actually should even out over time and be more rational. Maybe not equal, but more rational. We have a ways to go. It's interesting. This exists in watches. This exists in art. This exists in most collecting categories, where there is what we call in investing information asymmetry. So yourself as a tried and true expert, a master of his craft, you see very obvious arbitrage all the time between valuations, and it allows you to operate extremely successfully as you have. What I'm hoping for is that across these categories, we're migrating towards more market transparency. And market transparency will bring in more market efficiency. And so in 10 years or maybe even beyond, you can have sort of perfect market information, which allows individuals to make more informed decisions, and then you have more efficiency in markets. And so what that will do is that will bring more people into watches, because there's always a hesitation that if somebody doesn't have the good fortune of finding collectability or meeting you, John, the first steps into collecting can be very nerve-wracking, right? Am I buying the right thing? Am I overpaying? Is this a good time? All these things that you don't feel comfortable in the market. Information transparency and market efficiency will allow people to approach a market for the first time with more ease. And that will sort of bring more people into collecting, which then, actually has a buoying effect on valuations, on opportunities, on velocity, on a range of different things that is net positive, even though that prospect may seem terrifying to you. You're thinking, well, then where's my margin? Well, you don't worry, you'll be fine. You're an innovative guy, and you'll evolve towards more market efficiency.
But speaking of market efficiency, I spoke yesterday to a friend who is a Patek Philippe salesperson, and she said the holiday season was horrible because all of her top clients came in, new clients came in. They would ask for availability of X, Y, and Z, and her answer was no. And in retail, if your answer is always no, this isn't a good relationship builder. And she said it was very challenging when they have a case of 4 watches as an authorized retailer. And it was interesting to hear what 4 pieces were remaining. But normally an inventory should be 30, 40 pieces, but there's like nothing left to buy. As a technologist, I'd love to hear your suggestions as a solution to how these distribution problems can be corrected.
The major force here has been a multiplication effect of demand, right? While supply has increased, but not multiplied, right? And so one would, in free and open markets, that would lead towards price going up, right? Demand supply curves, you triple demand or quadruple demand as it's happened, then that would raise prices. But Patek Philippe price controls, right? And so whenever we've seen in economic history, whether it's, Argentina a decade ago, or, Brazil in the 70s, or many countries over the course of the 20th century, implement price controls, so not allow price to dictate equilibrium between demand and supply, you get perverse effects. You always get these strange secondary markets and gray markets, and even when governments try to like stamp those out, they never really can. Entrepreneurs will always find a way to match demand and supply. And so, we've seen is a lot of that demand has been driven into secondary markets, and then secondary markets have adjusted for those price controls. Just as a pure sort of mechanic, like a technician of economics and entrepreneurship and business, a first rule that one would look to is, okay, would price adjustments start to quell demand, and instead of being 4x or 5x oversubscribed, you're now 2x oversubscribed. And that means that half of, or if you're 2x oversubscribed, it means a third of your clients you can actually attend to. And it's not like a sixth of your clients you can actually attend to. And so that would be like, that would be one thing. The other thing would be increasing supply, obviously, but that has to be taken under great caution. I am very respectful and reverent and quite deferential of the way that the Stern family has stewarded the brand, right? And they have stewarded the brand primarily by ensuring that there's always a grand multiple of demand over supply. And that really is the foundation of the space that they enjoy being as successful as they have been. And then they sort of propagate that even more by sort of saying no to people who never hear no, right? Like of those Patek collectors who are going into that retailer, most of those people, no one's allowed to tell them no ever. And some of them who probably grew up in generational wealth have rarely heard no in their entire lives. And there's a strange sort of, there's a strange kind of sex appeal to that. There's kind of nobody ever says no to me. This is crazy. I want it even more. I would be remiss to say that I look at this as a problem that I rely on Patek Philippe to absolutely resolve. And the way that they should resolve it is, raise prices and increase supply. That could be okay to quell the current tsunami of demand, but that may have long-term effects for the brand. And again, we note that they have been extraordinary stewards of this brand. Yeah, I don't think that gives you a range of solutions that you would maybe look for. The one thing that I think would probably be reasonable for them to do, and again, I think they would maybe be incentivized to do if they could receive a royalty for resale, is they should maybe take a little bit less of a draconian approach with resale of watches, right? I always tell my friends, if Patek is willing to sell you a Patek, it's an amazing Nash equilibrium that exists between collector and an atelier in this case. Anybody who has bought a Patek and taken care of it can ensure that they will be able to sell it for, at what they bought, or probably even more anytime in the future. It's a great store of value. You could make money if you wanted to, but if you sell it, they will never sell you one again. And so, it's kind of one of these prisoner dilemmas where you can buy it, but if you sell it, then now your relationship is ruined and you can't buy it. So nobody sells them, right? Everyone just accumulates them because, if I sell, then I can't get another one. And then, that's a bad outcome for me. So I don't want to sell. So we have collectors with, hundreds of Pateks that they're not enjoying, they're not wearing, they're not using in any meaningful fashion that other people would really, really enjoy and love, that they don't want to sell because they're afraid of sort of breaking this Nash equilibrium that exists between themselves and Patek. I think if Patek was a little bit lighter touch with respect to resale, you could get the pieces into more collectors' hands reasonably, and then you wouldn't have such an intense, over-demanded situation for the company, which also must be uncomfortable at times, right? Like I imagine like a the receptionist at Patek must be getting hit up by everybody that they ever meet. Like, oh, can you like get me one? Like, it's probably something that's, again, it has a sort of short-term like sex appeal to it. And I'm like, oh, this is nice. I'm in demand. But then at the same time, over time, it probably just becomes annoying. So allowing for a resale market would be an experiment that I certainly would be in favor of. They did for many, many years. And it's only been in the last sort of 20, 25 years that they've had their CIA level psyops tracking down anybody collector that possibly sells a piece and blacklisting them for life and no matter what, including like, anybody else with their name or something like that. No, not that they do that, but they do ban people. But so that would be a solution that I think could merit isolated experimentation in this moment. I'm not saying that they need to like go and make a partnership with Chrono 24, but allowing for some kind of transfer of watches so that we don't have millions of Pateks just collecting dust in old rich people's closets. I think that would be helpful.
And interestingly, NFTs are the logical framework.
I would love, if anybody from Patek is listening to this, I would love to have a conversation with them about how they're approaching NFTs. They're technologically sophisticated as we see as collectors of the timepieces. And so I know that they must be having a conversation internally about this and evaluating how to approach it over time cautiously. And I would love to sit down and kind of just do a data dump of the lessons learned in NFTs over the almost decade that I have now in crypto, and sort of just offer these for food for thought and see where they're taking this. I would love to see them do something with like metaverse native digital timepieces. I think there's a lot of different things that could be done there. It's really, really interesting. You could propagate a whole new collector cohort, which could help quell some of that demand, right? Like a 25-year-old newly minted millionaire could buy his Patek Philippe timepiece, have it displayed on his phone, telling him the time the way that the phone tells you the time, and sort of, not run after a Nautilus for six figures in place, or not bug a retailer every single day for a Nautilus for 5 years, right? And then you can allow those people who are true collectors of the mechanical pieces for that art and artisanry to have the access that they need while satisfying demand in a different way on a different medium. I think it's a really, really high potential opportunity.
I hope Patek Philippe is listening. I hope they're listening to you right now. And if I was Patek Philippe, and I'm not, I'd be especially interested in this. The fact that in the past, they may have been policing, trying to find out what's happening. And NFT offers the platform to know what's happening and when a watch changes hands. And it also fills in beautifully, it dovetails into their history with the archives, where you're seeing the blockchain of owner to owner, generation to generation in an unbreakable, immutable fashion. And this is where technology meets tradition.
And that's truly amazing. You could have the entire history of a tech be available for data analytics while obfuscating the individuals who are trading it. And so then people could like historians, like yourself could run data that supports books and stories. And you can see like, here in like the oil crisis of the early 70s, velocity dropped off, and what story does that tell, and things like that. And you could do that analysis while they maintain privacy for themselves and their clients. All these technologies are trivially available and would open up a whole new world of storytelling around horology.
I have no doubt you're going to get a mysterious phone call in the middle of the night asking for further elaboration. All right. I have two final questions for you. One I've asked many times before, and one I have never asked before. First, what is your Grail watch?
The modern Grail is the 6003R. I like that they, again, they did something very unique. They very differentiated from what you know as Patek. It's an open face watch. It's a Grand Sonnière. The Grand Sonnière is really the timepiece where Patek reminds the world sort of who the king is. The Patek Grand Sonnières are noticeably more vibrant in their music. I don't say sound, but music than what I've seen in many others. And so it's really a technological breakthrough that they guard and keep, quite beautifully. And so that's something that I would love to add to the collection over time. And I personally really like open face watches. I think there's some beauty there's great beauty to seeing the mechanisms. But again, that is very non-standard for Patek, and they haven't made many open faces over the years, and this is one that is absolutely spectacular in every way.
I think it's an excellent choice, and if you get one, let's consider a fractional ownership deal, because I would love to have one too. There frankly aren't enough to go around.
If I get one, I'd probably have to get it as a fractional ownership, because it's incredibly difficult to procure at this point.
Before I ask my second and final question, just a little bit of commentary. I've been reading that you are also heavily invested in the psychedelic world.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to learn from you why you think this is an interesting space, and are there any tie-ins in the world of horology and art collecting? And I read in another interview you did that your friend Chris Dixon said, quote, "If you want to know what the next big thing is in venture, look at what the nerds are doing on the weekends." So my question to you is, can you teach me and our loyal listeners more about psychedelics?
Sure. This is great. And thank you so much for asking. The first part of this is the opportunity set that exists for psychedelics. I've been fortunate in that my wife is a psychedelic therapist, and has done many ceremonies for many people over the years, and I've been grateful to be able to accompany these ceremonies over the years and run my own sort of non-scientific but empirical study of just how transformational these ceremonies can be for people when they take a thoughtful approach, when they go into these ceremonies with an intention to, say, resolve something or answer a question that they're struggling with, or put something behind them that has caused trauma or they're having difficulty getting over. The academic evidence from the academic renaissance in psychedelics is overwhelming in terms of efficacy. The addiction, PTSD, depression, when people take this very thoughtful approach and they use psychedelics as a catalyst towards approaching their mental health in a new way, the results are undeniable. And in fact, overwhelming. I was brought to this myself because a close friend of mine was struggling a great deal with a major addiction problem, and this was really a last-ditch effort for him to go into the jungles and try ayahuasca. And he's now 6 years sober and thriving in a way that I could not have imagined that the man that was going into the jungles would have been able to achieve. And I've seen so many of these stories over the years. So I started looking at this space in terms of like venture opportunity, and about 2018, thinking of these things like, Chris's famous quote of, if you want to learn what the next big thing in venture is, look to what the nerds are doing on the weekends. And I was living in San Francisco, and I can tell you what the nerds are doing on the weekends is psychedelics, right? So many people subscribe to this sort of novel approach to health and wellness. Whether it's California Sober or biohackers or Burning Man culture or people who just want to take a new path towards achieving mental health. Before the pandemic, one of the data points that we often cited in starting Vine Ventures was that 1 in 5 people globally struggle with some form of mental health ailment. I would say that given the pandemic, the mental health pandemic that we've unleashed onto our society in parallel has probably caused that number to double, and maybe even more. So we're looking at an enormous amount of people who struggle with mental health. I know of no family who escaped the grips of mental health through the pandemic. Some person in each family that I know of had some issue with mental health, my own included. And so I'm looking at this as not a silver bullet solution. A psychedelic therapy is not necessarily going to solve all of your problems, but we have enough data points that show that it is very clearly a step in the right direction and a really important tool for people to either reset their relationship with a trauma in the past or handle their mental health in a different way. And that became a mission beyond money for me. I was saying to myself early on that if I don't make any money with Vine Ventures, but we allow for a world where everybody who wishes to explore psychedelic therapies, either for curing the sick or eventually for betterment of the well, because it's great to, catalyze a meditation routine. It's great for, for new ideas. It's great for healthy normals and not just sick people. Although it's kind of a swear word to say that in the current psychedelics space. If everybody who wants access to psychedelic therapies can get access to psychedelic therapies, well, who cares if I make money in it? Because the world's going to be such a better place. Incidentally, again, venture creates and accrues money from or value from solving great problems. And I know of no problem on the planet greater than this. People often will respond to me when I say this, climate change. And I spent a decade in renewables. Climate change is solved. It's just a matter of actually deploying the technologies that exist. The technologies are mature and it's just a matter of deployment. That'll take a couple decades, but from a technological perspective, climate change, we have all the solutions. Mental health, we do not. And mental health is causing as much human suffering as anything I know on the planet. Investing in psychedelics and starting Vine Ventures is a very much a mission-driven passion of mine to genuinely help the world and fundamentally, hopefully, move us forward. It wasn't, if I become an investor in these psychedelic companies, then maybe I can get free samples or something like that. It really is something where we think if we can run fast enough, we can save lives. And I think we're seeing that with MAPS, that the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Science, they're ready to come out next year with MDMA therapy for PTSD patients. The number of PTSD-stricken veterans and rape victims and all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life where they have saved their lives with this MDMA therapy. It's overwhelming, and it's really actually emotional to deal with sometimes. Where you wait. I've never worked in something where I wake up and I think, if we don't get this done, people are going to die. But this is a space where that's the feeling every single day. And so we're trying our best. And fortunately, I think it's starting to catch on. We're seeing great movements all across North America in this regard. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to help a lot of people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. Once again, you informed me on the space that I'm learning about, that I actually didn't know much about it until I met you. But as I speak to other collectors and other people in various industries, this is very much a topic of conversation along the lines of NFTs, watches, psychedelics. And once you get over people do have preconceived notions, but once they start learning about it, understanding the science, they may have a different opinion. So this is absolutely fascinating. Thank you for shedding light on important problem and solution.
Well, thank you so much for bringing this up and sharing it with your audience. It's very important, this education and awareness. And so I'm grateful to you for this. And again, grateful to you for your guidance on this journey of horology that I've been on. I could not do it without you. And I look forward to many more opportunities to find great things together.
Ryan, thank you so much. And for our listeners, this was our most recent episode in our Collectability podcast series. Thank you all for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. And remember to follow us in any podcast player you enjoy using in order not to miss our future recordings. Thank you all for listening. This is John Reardon for Collectability.